There we go. I will start the presentation. So hopefully you can all see my screen there. And as I said, we're talking tonight about the Hellidon Conservation Area. It's myself, Rhiannon Morgan, and Anna Wilson with us this evening. So we have been undertaking a district-wide review of Daventry's conservation areas, and this includes Hellidon Conservation Area. The district-wide review is part of the District Council's statutory duty to undertake reviews of its existing conservation areas and to also look at new conservation areas as well. And we're required to do that under the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. And of course, Hellidon is one of our existing conservation areas. So Hellidon was designated in 1976 as a conservation area, and it was last reviewed in 1999. So it's quite a few years since the last review has been undertaken, so about 20 years. And so this provides a good opportunity for the District Council to be able to assess the condition of the conservation area, to see whether the boundary that was put in place in 1999 is fit for purpose, or whether there are any areas that require revisiting. So, for example, areas that now are considered to merit being put in the conservation area, or any areas that on the contrary have deteriorated in character and therefore require being removed from a conservation area. So as I said, conservation areas are something that the District Council designates through the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, and that is something that is a duty that is given to local planning authorities rather than any other body. And conservation areas themselves are described as areas of special architectural or historic interest. So that's what makes a conservation area. And there are over 10,000 of them designated in the country, and they were first introduced in 1967 through the Civic Communities Act. So since then, a great number have been designated, and the aim of designating conservation areas is to preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the conservation areas. So where an area has this special architectural or historic interest that can be identified, then that is what we seek to preserve or enhance. And certainly in Daventry District, we have some of the best examples in the county of conservation areas of very, very high quality, with exceptional architecture and notable historic interest in how the conservation areas have developed. Our conservation areas generally tend to focus around rural villages, and there is the Market Town conservation area in Daventry, but conservation areas across the country, of course, vary greatly in character, and they can cover a great deal of different types of areas. So, for example, we have lots of residential conservation areas, but they can cover industrial areas, commercial, or areas of landscape as well, and they can vary in size from being very small and maybe covering only a handful of buildings to covering many hectares of landscape. And because they vary in terms of the types of area they cover, their character and appearance also varies greatly, and therefore it can be influenced by a lot of different types of factor, lots of different variables. But generally that includes the land use within the conservation area. So as I said, residential, commercial, for example, industrial. The types of building materials that are used to construct the buildings within the conservation area, whether these are vernacular, for example, as a lot of our conservation areas in Daventry District use vernacular stone for a lot of their buildings. There can also be a big influence from things like the consistent use of open spaces, or the impact of things like views across the conservation area, how the conservation area is experienced, and also out towards the landscape or other setting that might be around the conservation area, and also views into the conservation area as well. So Hellidon itself has a very particular character, and hence it's designated as a conservation area in 1976. And a large amount of its character is created by its built environment and also its rural setting as well. So the age of its building stock, a lot of which dates from between the 17th and 19th centuries, and that's both its domestic and agricultural buildings, which constitute the majority of the buildings in the conservation area. It's also greatly influenced by the fact that it has retained a very legible historic layout, which can be plotted back on historic mapping several centuries, and also can be seen on the ground. So some of the areas around the conservation area, the current conservation area as it stands, show the influence of previous settlement, and that's both the evidence of buildings and of agricultural practice as well in the fields around the village. And within the village itself, the building stock is very coherent across the conservation area, and that's due to the consistent use of those vernacular building materials, so particularly the local stone, but also local brick as well. And that consistency is carried through the land use, so generally domestic use in the buildings, but there are still many farm buildings, and that agricultural character is still very legible and clear. And the use of the vernacular building materials does extend into boundary treatments as well. So some very key significant stone walling and brick walling, which can be found around the conservation area. And the agricultural character of the conservation area definitely extends into the conservation area, not just around it in its setting, in the influence of open spaces within the conservation area, which are used for pasture predominantly. So earlier I mentioned that within conservation areas there is a duty for the council to preserve or enhance the special character and appearance of conservation areas. And in order to help to do this, there are specific planning controls within conservation areas that aim to not stop development, but to manage development so that it can be steered to be sympathetic to the historic environment. And the main controls within conservation areas are over the demolition of buildings, certain development, so that includes building or demolishing walls, gates and fences, cladding buildings, certain alterations to roofs, certain rear extensions and all side extensions, the construction of outbuildings, and the installation of radio antennae and satellite dishes. There is also a notification process within conservation areas for works to trees. So works to trees over a certain size require notification of 6 weeks to be given to the council before those works are undertaken. And planning applications within conservation areas are determined with reference to any published guidance. So, for example, conservation area appraisals, such as the draft one that's been produced, and any other material considerations. So that might be national policy, local policy, or other documents that refer to the planning of the area. So things like neighbourhood development plans or village design statements. So on the screen here you have an image of the existing conservation area. So as I said at the beginning, this was reviewed and designated in 1999, and hopefully you can see it on the screen. The colours aren't very clear, I do apologise, but the conservation area is the yellow hatching. And then the red polygons are listed buildings within the conservation area, and there are quite a lot of listed buildings within Hellidon, including the church, Hellidon Grange, which is Grade 2 star listed, and a number of other domestic properties. So that's as it stands, and in the draft conservation area appraisal that we are consulting on at the moment, we have proposed some extensions to the conservation area. So those are shown here. So you can see there are 4 main areas of proposed extension, and these are numbered BA1 to 4. And I'll just quickly take you through those. You can see them there hopefully on the screen. They are the areas shaded in the light blue. So BA1 is the proposed inclusion to the west of the current conservation area, and that includes an area of open pasture which contains some ridge and furrow, and then extends out to the west to Manor Farm. So it includes those buildings, the outbuildings and the house itself, and the field to the north, which also contains some ridge and furrow. And then it also proposes to take in the old barley mow. BA2 is a proposed extension to take in some agricultural land to the sort of northish east of the current conservation area, and again there is evidence there of previous settlements that relates to the current village, which can be seen in aerial photographs, and there are also some views across that land out of and towards the current conservation area across the footpaths which go along through that land. BA3 is a proposed extension out to the east of the conservation area that takes in an area of, again, an area of open space and the pond just north of the road that goes back up to Daventry. And then BA4 is a proposed extension to the south of Hellidon Grange, just to take in effectively what is the remainder of its plot going down to the Prize Marston Road, including the walled garden there. So those are the 4 proposed extensions, and all of the full reasoning for those is provided in the draft conservation area appraisal. So if you'd like a more in-depth bit of information about those, then you can find it there, and that's available on our website. And I think now I'm just going to hand over to Anna, who will take us through some information about the conservation area appraisals and the consultation. So thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Rhiann. So as Rhiann's already mentioned, conservation areas are designated due to their special interest, and as part of the review that we carry out, we've produced a draft conservation area appraisal and management plan. And these documents express the special interest and identify what about an area is important, as well as highlighting areas which could benefit from enhancement in the future, or any threats to the character of the conservation area. So conservation area appraisals vary depending on the authority or the group that's produced them, but generally they contain an explanation of the development of the area in terms of its historic interest, including any known or possible archaeological interest. It also includes information about the architectural interest of the area, expressed through building types, the style of buildings, the types of materials that they use, and their age. And the appraisals we produce also include information on spatial elements which contribute to how the conservation area is experienced, such as views within the conservation area, views out from it, and also towards it from the surrounding area. And we also look at open spaces and modes of movement through the conservation area, including public footpaths. And finally, something else we consider is the public realm as well. So things such as street furniture, signage, and street lighting. So altogether, this provides useful information for applicants and decision makers in assessing whether any development or works are appropriate and whether they will preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area. Could I have the next slide, please? So appraisals are adopted by Daventry District Council as supplementary planning documents, which means they're a material consideration in determining planning decisions, which affects the special interest of the conservation area. Within the hierarchy of documents used to assist the determination of planning decisions, conservation area appraisals and management plans sit below what we call the development plan, so the settlements and countryside plan, and they also sit below any neighbourhood plan which may be in place for the area. They sit alongside village design statements, which also have the status of a supplementary planning document. But they're really helpful in supporting and providing sort of more detail to those policies in the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, which, for example, those policies that deal with heritage. Could I have the next slide, please? So one of the other things that we do as part of the conservation area review is identify potential candidates for the local list. Daventry District Council maintains a local list which identifies buildings and sites that are considered to be locally important, but they don't necessarily meet the criteria for statutory listing. But local lists play an essential role in building and reinforcing a sense of local character and distinctiveness in the historic environment as part of the wider range of designation. So although local list status doesn't introduce any additional planning restrictions, it does enable the significance of any site or building that's on the list to be better taken into account in planning applications that affect the building, the site or its setting. So generally buildings and sites added to the local list are those that are unlikely to be statutory designated, like listed buildings or scheduled monuments. Instead, they're recognised as non-designated heritage assets of local importance, and they're given protection through policy rather than legislation. So the local list candidates are identified as part of the fieldwork that and the research that we carry out during the conservation area review, and they're assessed against a set of criteria that have been adopted by the council. If a particular building meets the criteria for the local list, they're consulted on and adopted as part of the conservation area appraisal process. So the buildings in Hellidon that are being proposed to be added to the local list are set out in the appraisal and management plan. But members of the public can also propose buildings and sites for inclusion on the local list. So if you have a look at the document and there's a particular building or site that isn't in the document at the moment, if you send us details of that particular building and any reasons you think it should be added to the local list, then we'll consider that as part of this consultation. Could I have the next slide, please? So, as I've already said, conservation area status introduces some extra planning controls, but minor developments such as some domestic alterations can normally be carried out without planning permission under the provisions of the 2015 General Permitted Development Order, the GDPO. And these sort of smaller changes, these incremental changes taking place, can gradually erode aspects of the fabric of historic buildings and their historic character. And that can lead to sort of degradation of the overall character of the conservation area. So Article 4 of the GPDO gives planning authorities the power to limit these permitted development rights where they consider it necessary to protect the local amenity or the character of the area. So using the provisions of the Article 4 of the GDPO brings certain types of development back into the control of the local planning authority, so that potentially harmful proposals can be considered on a case-by-case basis through planning applications. So this is another aspect of the work that we do during the conservation area review, where we identify features that would benefit from being included in an Article 4 direction. If it's considered appropriate, they're proposed in the conservation area appraisal. This includes the permitted development rights that are going to be removed and the locations that are affected. However, if the appraisal is adopted by the council, this doesn't bring the Article 4 direction into force. They are actually put in place through a separate process, which would take place after the conservation area designation, and the Article 4 has a further consultation process, which is a separate process. Could I have the next slide? So the consultation is obviously running at the moment. The dates are at the bottom there. So it began on the 23rd of November, and it's running till the 18th of January. It's going to be running for a period of 8 weeks. The consultation document, so that's the appraisal, the consultation notice, and also an online survey that you can fill in to respond to the consultation, are all available to view on the council website. You can send comments in online through the survey, or via post, or via email. And we are able to send out hard copies of the appraisal document free of charge during the consultation period. Let's have the next slide. So what happens after the consultation period has finished? Well, once it's closed, we compile a report which includes all the information, all the comments received, our response to those comments, and any resulting changes to the boundary or the appraisal and management plan. That report is then presented to the council, and it decides whether to adopt the new boundary and adopt the appraisal as a supplementary planning document. And following that decision, we write to all the properties within the conservation area to notify them. If the conservation area boundary is adopted, then the additional area planning controls come into force immediately, and they apply to all the properties that are within the designated area. You might be wondering what will happen when we become part of the new unitary authority, the West Northamptonshire Council, in April 2021. So conservation areas are a national designation, so the boundaries and the appraisals and the management plans will be carried forward into the new authority, and they'll continue to be used by the planners to make decisions on planning applications. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I've just got the details of the consultation up there again for you. So it closes at 5 p.m. on the 18th of January. So all comments must be received by that date and that time, and we must receive those in writing. So just got the email address there that you can send your comments to. Below that there's the postal address, and we've also just got the website address there as well, which is where you can download the documents, and also where you can access the survey if you'd rather fill in a survey to respond to the consultation. I think, as Rhiann said at the beginning, that these slides will be available on the website towards the end of the week. So you'll be able to, if you haven't managed to scribble all these details down, you should be able to get those from the slides on the website. I think I'm going to hand back to Rhiann now, who's going to deal with some questions that have come in.
Yes, thanks, Anna. So just bear with me one moment. There we go. So yes, we've had one question come in prior to the session. So I'll just go through that, and then we've got some time, so we'll open up if anybody has any questions while we're here. So the question we were sent was, the question relates to section 7.5 of the consultation document, and in particular the proposal for field OS3, arable land to the south of Littleback Lane. This field is proposed to be categorised as making a moderate contribution to the conservation area, whereas field OS5, arable land south of Church Lane, is proposed to be categorised as making a significant contribution. Please would the Council explain why this is so, when OS3 is an equally important position as OS5, being adjacent to the Grade 2 star listed Hellidon Grange. There are also equally important vistas over the field when towards the to the conservation area, when viewed from what is locally known as Big Back Lane. Furthermore, the proposed removal of certain permitted development rights from the old vicarage suggests that views from the south towards the conservation area along Littleback Lane are important. So thank you very much for that question. When we assess the open spaces around and within conservation areas for our conservation area appraisals, we consider effectively what contribution that area makes to either the character and appearance of the conservation area itself, or alternatively to its setting if the open space isn't within the conservation area. So I'll just caveat this with it. At this particular stage, I can't give a complete response because further work would need to be done to reassess the particular contribution made by this open space that's labelled OS3 in the conservation area appraisal. But at this stage, what I can say is that particular area, OS3, which you can see at figure 30 in the draft Hellidon conservation area appraisal, which has been assessed as making a moderate contribution to the setting of the conservation area because it's adjacent to the boundary. So OS5 has been identified as making a significant contribution and is also adjacent to the proposed conservation area. So it's making that contribution again to the setting of the conservation area. The main difference between the two areas and their contribution specifically to that setting is the views that have been identified across OS5, which take in the grade 2 star listed Hellidon Grange. And they are particularly notable from both the Prize Marston Road and also the footpaths that go across the area that's been labelled as OS5. And that is something that effectively meant that it was assessed as having a significant contribution to the setting of the conservation area due to those views. When the appraisal work was undertaken, OS3 was assessed, and there were no significant views identified as stretching across that particular open piece of land. The question, of course, is proposing that there are particular vistas that are of significance, and this means that effectively we will go and revisit those that area, and we will check to see whether there are any views that have been missed, and if there are views that mean that it would be that the contribution of its this particular open space should be enhanced from moderate to significant, then that is something that we would do through the report that goes to our strategy group and then the council. So we would, if we consider after revisiting it that a change is justified, then that is something that we would suggest through that report. So I'm not entirely sure whether the person who submitted that question is on the meetings, and I think they are, but if you are, then what I would ask is if you could just send it in as a formal consultation response, and then it makes it easier for us to go ahead and reassess it and then be able to address it through that report rather than in this particular forum. But either way, we will be able to do that revisiting and reassessing of OS3, and if there are any changes that we feel are justified to be made, then we will let you know, and we'll put that in the report. So that's all I can say on that particular question at this stage. But I would just like to open it up now in case anybody has any questions for us. I think you're all muted, but you should be able to unmute if you like, or alternatively, you can use the chat function, which is at the bottom of the screen, if you prefer just to type in your question. So I'll just open that up now in case anybody has any questions.
If I perhaps could start.
Yes, of course.
Andrew Taylor. I submitted the question that you've just dealt with, so I thought if I jumped in while we're on that particular subject. Yes, I mean, you obviously accurately referred to the question and my comparison to OS5, but I think if the council is willing to review the status of OS3, that is obviously appreciated. But I think all I'd like to say is that when I submit a formal representation to the council, I would also refer to OS1 as another field, because it does seem to me that this is OS3 is stuck in the middle, basically, and if the views from OS1 are important across the conservation area, then surely, because that field OS1 overlooks OS3, and then you look beyond that to the conservation area, it just seems very odd that OS3 has been given a different designation at this stage. So I'll make that point in my formal representation in hopes that someone will review it.
Yes, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. Yeah, if you could send that, and any supporting information that you've got. So, for example, anything about again the consideration of OS1, that's appreciated if you could put that in, and then we will reassess it and get back to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask, please, what has changed since 1999, when the existing plan was presumably, to use your words, considered fit for purpose, to render it such that it may no longer be fit for purpose, to use your words?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's a good question. So, unfortunately, a lot of compared to now, where when we're making these proposals, we put these conservation area appraisals forward, which identify what's special about the conservation area in some detail, and also provide the reports that accompany those appraisals to our council, both prior to and after consultation. A lot of the previous reviews that were undertaken, there isn't the same supporting information, so it makes it very difficult for us to say exactly why conservation areas were designated, how they were previously, or when they were previously reviewed, as we don't have that specific justification that we now put forward as part of our work. In a lot of cases, it can be quite difficult to say exactly why certain areas might have been left out. But effectively, how we undertake our work is both with internal, the use of internal expertise within the council, and also with the use of current best practice guidance. So best practice guidance has been developed quite a lot since the 90s, particularly in the last few years. Conservation area designation and appraisal and management, Historic England have produced very good best practice guidance on how that should be undertaken, and also generally on the management of the historic environment. This is something that perhaps wasn't available in the 90s, but it's what we work to now, and that's how we produce the proposals and the appraisals that we do with reference to that best practice guidance. So the areas that we have identified as potentially meriting being included within the conservation area, new conservation area boundary, are areas that we feel make a contribution to the character of the conservation area, such that they merit being included, and would benefit from being included within that conservation area as well. So because of their either architectural or historic interest, which has to be inherent within a conservation area. So unfortunately, we can't say exactly why areas may have been left out previously, but that is how we make our decisions now. These are the types of things, the historical and architectural interest, the types of areas we're looking at to reassess, and in this case include a few new areas within the conservation area. I hope that answers your question. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I might just jump in with a question if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
I did actually send the question in on Friday, so I don't know if you got it or not.
Oh, I do apologise. It didn't. I've only received the one question, so I do apologise.
Okay. Well, I had a response back from your one of your team. So anyway, I think what I was just drawing on, which picks up from where Alan left off in terms of what has changed. When back in 1999, what you've now designated as BA1, so effectively the Barley Mow and the Manor House, you considered it back in 1999. And to quote back from the letter that was written by the council, after much consideration, it was felt on balance that the old Barley Mow and Manor Farm should not be included, mainly due to their physical detachment from the compact, tight-knitted and enclosed character of the conservation area. And I think, and in terms of field 3339, which I think we all know as the green, it's the field that backs onto Berry Lane. This field was considered to be at the rear of all properties on Berry Lane, and although it does not offer attractive long-distance views, these are mainly towards Lower Catesby and beyond the Hellidon conservation area. So I think in there, the council provided the reasoning for not including Manor Farm, the old Bowley Mow, in the conservation area. And I would argue, therefore, that that reasoning still stands.
Yes, I mean, that obviously at the time was how the staff who were dealing with the conservation area appraisal review in 1999, that was the decision that they came to, as you say, on as the letter says, on balance, of how they've considered it. I think I would argue that our proposals are based, as I said, on that best practice, and I can understand the argument of that they are physically, separated by that open space that is in between the farm and the barley mow, and as it says, the kind of more tight-knit area of the village. However, I would also argue that they historically, as we've seen through our fieldwork and our secondary research for the conservation area appraisal, historically they did develop as a very important part of the village, and they certainly contribute positively to its character, including both the built environment and the open spaces, and the open spaces, whilst they do form a boundary to that kind of that tight-knit area, as it says, they also provide a very good indication of the historic agricultural practices that were key to the development of the village. So those are the reasons why we have proposed the extension. I can understand that does sound like we are effectively going against what has previously been proposed by the council, but the work that we're doing now is, as I said, influenced by that current best practice, and it's something that we feel is justified as officers, using the current expertise in the council that's available. It is something that does sometimes happen, that previous decisions that are made are then not necessarily agreed with, regarding these types of things, and regarding the contribution and impact of heritage. So that's effectively sort of, how I would say is our proposals that we're putting forward, we feel are justified, but I can understand why that could look a bit strange in terms of us proposing something that previously wasn't proposed. So I hope that's at least provided a little bit of information about why we are proposing the areas that we are at this stage. Are there any other questions at all for us? If you prefer not to ask a question in this forum, then you can email us as well. That's not a problem, at the heritage@daventry.dc.gov email address, if anybody has a question for that particular, regarding anything that we discussed tonight, or anything in the draft appraisal as well, if you'd rather not ask a question here.
Can I ask another question if no one
Yes.
else has got one?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Again, the fields at the back of Berry Lane, so between Berry Lane and the Manor Cottage, you've wanted to include in it. And from your report, it seems that the weight of including those fields is because of their potential archaeological merit, and therefore you're trying to preserve that, or you don't want the ground to be disturbed in an uncontrolled way. But surely now that you've already picked up there's an archaeological potential in there, why is there then the need to put a further layer of bureaucracy on top of that to protect land that has actually been laid undisturbed for 200 years anyway? It should even, and actually, other than your potential LiDAR survey, there's no other evidence to say whether or not there is remains of buildings underneath there anyway.
So the areas that are proposed that have got archaeological potential, that's again part of their positive contribution. So both the area in BA1 and then BA2 as it is across the village as well. So those areas are partly proposed for inclusion because of that historic interest that they include areas of archaeological potential as we've identified, but also because of the contribution that they make visually as well. So both the views that have been identified across those areas that are considered as significant, and also the historic layout of those areas. So things like field boundaries, for example, that are historic and have been retained and can be plotted back on historic mapping. So it's not necessarily just that they might have an archaeological potential. So there's a kind of few layers, as it were, to the reasoning of why those areas have been included. I understand completely what you mean about areas, laying undisturbed for a long time, and it's not necessarily that there is a direct threat that has been addressed to those areas. It's that it's the inherent part of the conservation area designation. So the council has a duty to review its conservation areas, as I said at the beginning of the presentation. And conservation areas are, by definition, areas of architectural and historic interest. And the best practice guidance that is available at the moment promotes the identification of areas of potential archaeological interest, and also the consideration of whether those areas are positively contribute to the character of the conservation area and provide evidence potentially of how the conservation area and how the area itself has developed, and therefore there's also the potential of consideration of whether those areas should be included within a conservation area. So where areas are open space, it isn't necessarily that they require further planning controls, because the planning controls in conservation areas, whilst there are some over the building of outbuildings, for example, and new development like that, generally they relate to planning controls over existing buildings, but in these circumstances it's the motivation of areas having that historical interest and being evidence of how an area has developed over time, that can be seen both through secondary sources and also on the ground, and it's their visual contribution, and that's the reasoning for including these areas in the proposed conservation area, rather than necessarily having a specific kind of layer of planning control over those open spaces. So I hope that again provides a bit more information about why we propose those areas for inclusion.
It's a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle, though, because if you include an area because of its visual aspect and because it looks nice and you can see it from other views, you then, when you review it again in a few years' time, you'll then include those areas that look onto it, and then slowly you increase the conservation area without necessarily adding any merit.
Yeah, I can understand what you mean insofar as there is an exercise to be looked at in terms of where areas that are normally termed what is the setting of a conservation area, so the areas around it, for example, although it isn't necessarily just physical proximity, but that is generally how the exercise works in conservation area appraisals. There is it's good practice to look at those areas and see whether they contribute to the conservation area such that they merit being included in the conservation area itself. So part of that is a bit what we've discussed earlier about the open space analysis, partly how we look at that, and whether areas should or shouldn't be included within the conservation area. But it isn't just necessarily that they, as I mentioned, it's not necessarily just one factor. It isn't just that they are visually a positive contributor. It's that they're a kind of multi-layers of contribution that they make, and particularly it's that important historic interest that's inherent within the conservation area designation that we are looking to protect through conservation area designation, rather than necessarily just what it looks like. Are there any other questions at all tonight? I think we'll probably take that as a... Oh,
is there grounds to appeal your report once it's been passed by committee?
Yes, so there is a right of appeal which you can find information about on the planning portal. So if you go on the government website and go on the planning portal, there's information there about appeals. And if you struggle to find it, because the website usually is fairly user friendly, but sometimes unless you know specifically what you're looking for, it can be a bit tricky. So if you struggle to find it, then please do let us know and we can try and send you a link to it. But yes, there is a right of appeal, and it goes through as a judicial review of the decision. So there is a time limit after the decision by the council as to there's a time limit as to when you can put in a judicial review, but all of the information should be again available on the planning portal for you. So unless there are any further questions, there's a few minutes left, but unless there's any further questions, I think we'll probably finish there. So if I could thank everybody very much for joining us tonight, and to thank Anna as well for your help. And as we said at the beginning of the presentation, there'll be this is recorded, so this will be put up on the website for you if you'd like to revisit it at all. And if you do have any further questions, then please do email us at the Heritage email. And if you would like to put any comments in, then the deadline is 5 p.m. on the 18th of January, and you can find all the information relevant to the consultation on our conservation areas page on the website. So on that note, thank you again for attending, and I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their evening. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.